NoSQL database are also known as not only SQL. I mean, there is a misconception NoSQL might mean not SQL or no SQL involved, but actually it's actually called not only SQL. That is, NoSQL databases do support SQL-like query language as well as in bigger systems and application. NoSQL database can set aside SQL system and make it a single database unit that we talk about. So if you talk about the fundamentals, NoSQL database are non-tabular form of databases, unlike we see SQL and Oracle, which are tabular form. And there are varieties of NoSQL databases which are based on different types. So some of the examples that we have in front of us are key value pair, document, graph, and wide column. In the next series of this video, I'll be talking about these examples in more detail. For now, we'll focus on NoSQL database. Now, NoSQL database usage has been increasing in recent times, especially when big data is on a rise. So with big data in real-time web application, NoSQL database finds greater use. Also, if we talk about the complexity, so complexity of NoSQL database decreases when you have multiple or complex joins. We know with SQL there are multiple joins, especially I'll be taking an example pretty soon. We'll see that there are two tables which we are joining, and those sort of joins can be very easily implemented in a NoSQL database. And also NoSQL database, the best thing about NoSQL database is it is horizontally scalable. That is, you don't have to rely on vertical scaling, because we know there is a limit to vertical scaling. So if we talk about vertical scaling and horizontal scaling, I hope you understand that for a vertical scaling, it means increasing the resources of the server, and there is a limit to which you can do it, right? Whereas if you talk about horizontal scaling, it means increasing the instances of that server. If you have, let's say, one instance of NoSQL database, you can maybe you can create two more or three more to make it a total of, let's say, three or four instances. Why? Because NoSQL compared to SQL or Oracle is a distributed database. So if you remember SQL or Oracle, there is always a primary, and then there are secondary and tertiary, or secondary mainly instances where all the read write happens on the primary, and whatever is written on the primary is of course synced to the secondary. You cannot write on two instances or three instances together, but that is not true with the NoSQL database. With NoSQL database, if you have, let's say, four instances, you can write on all those four instances together, or maybe sequentially, and all those four instances later on can actually sync between them. That is why it is called a node. It's called a distributed database, as well as it brings in the concept of horizontal scaling. So that is one of the major advantage. And if you would like to compare a NoSQL with a SQL database, these are the major two differences. That is on the horizontal scalability. Second is the distribution, or how distributed database NoSQL is, and SQL does not allow you the distribution concept. Now let's take an example. So here I have a SQL database where there is a table which has 5 columns. So the column ID talks about the ID of the employees. There are two. There's a name, address ID, age, and role. So address ID is a field which is actually linked to another table. So there is another table which has this address ID. So it's linked to this table. It is a join, and this address ID further has certain fields. Otherwise, what would have happened? I would have to create a big table with that, let's say, 9 columns, in which I would have to include city, country, district, and pin code. Now, why that won't be a good idea or great idea? Because the query complexity would increase, the time taken for the query to resolve would increase, and it of course would not be optimized. So this is an optimized way to do that, but then it has two tables which are joined together. Now if I have to find for this let's say candidate Saurabh, what is the pin code of this candidate, then through the linking table, or through this table which is joined to it, I'll be able to find it here. So this is how we do it in SQL. But when you compare it with NoSQL, in NoSQL you don't have the same concept. In NoSQL, what we have is a JSON kind of format. What we are looking at right now, it's a document type DB, where you do not require a separate table for address. What you can do is you can have these entries in a more different, or in a different fashion or different manner, where you can have say name here and address, and that again can have these fields further. So there is a sort of nesting which is coming in. With that sort of nesting, you can have any level of nesting and make it easier. There would be no joins required and no two separate tables. So with this, we have one ID and then value to it. So it's a key value pair. So collection of key value pair is mostly a document. So here if you see, there's an ID and value. ID is 101 from here, and then the value itself contains all these fields along with the nesting of the other table. So this has been done for both these records if we see. So now if I talk about or conclude it, so the NoSQL we are talking about, you can use different formats. It can have, let's say, it provides you flexibility. One more thing that we have missed here, and I would like to highlight, that in a SQL database, if you see this district, I was not having any value for district for the line item 10 or this address ID 10. But still in SQL, whether you have the data or whether you don't have it, you still have to store it as a null value. Same doesn't go into NoSQL. So if you see NoSQL here, I didn't had any district. That was fine with this particular record, but for this record I had district, so I was able to include that. So if you do not have a value, that is not stored in NoSQL, but in SQL that has to be stored as a null value. Thus, if you talk about the SQL part, the NoSQL would be very flexible in terms of how you store the data, as well as it makes it quite easier for you to store the data in a regular form, because multiple joins are not required, at least the complex one, right? So we have talked about some advantages and good points about NoSQL. There might be some disadvantages as well. So some of the disadvantages that I would like to highlight is slow read. So when you have a lot of updates to be done within the table, then it might be leading to slow read, as well as the join operation is tough. So I'm saying join is not required, but let's say if join was required at all, then joining two NoSQL database tables or NoSQL databases itself is quite a very complex and difficult task. So with that, we conclude this. For the next video, we'll be talking about the types of NoSQL database in much more detail. We'll be talking about key value pair, document type database, wide column type database, and graph database. Right? Thanks for joining. I'll see you next time.